Wow, we got 100. The audacity to sit here on a Sunday evening on a long weekend and think we would get more than that is pretty good. So good to see 109 people in here to start the stream. It's good to be back to football, isn't it? NFL finally upon us. Summer's getting long. I got to tell you, there's nothing better than waiting for NFL. There's just nothing better than betting on NFL. And so it's good to have the NFL back in our lives for the next 25, 26 weeks. So good to have everybody here with us. I'm going to try to be as entertaining as possible as we move through this, but I'm going to need your help along the way as you put in any questions that you might have into the chat. You should be able to do it. I'll pull it up on the screen. We're using a new system as well. So not only is this hopefully informative, but it's also something we can test too as we're looking forward to release shows. So I'm going to be going through each and every game on the NFL board, sharing some of my thoughts, at least where I can for the most part. Still a couple things, maybe keeping a little bit private, but I'll go through. And then if you have any questions as we go, help me out, put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them. There's about 15 that I got through Twitter as well. And so I'll get to those and sort of sprinkle them in as we go. Big thing as we get going here was about 15 minutes ago, there was a prop service that released Gibbs receiving yards over for Thursday night. I think that's a fantastic place to start. Obviously, the first game of the season, the first game on the rotation board. So in regards to that bet specifically, because there was a tweet about it, there was a comment this morning from Ben Johnson about how he wanted to use Gibbs in unexpected ways. And so not only do I think that this service was looking into that, but also there was another service earlier yesterday afternoon was firing these out as well. So that Gibbs over so far has been pretty popular. What I would say in that regard is obviously the Chiefs D-line very banged up, and that's really going to be the story of this game. And when you look at what the Lions offensive line has become, one of the better sort of top half units within the league, you can put them right around that 8 to 12 mark. If they're not going to be sort of dealing with strength in this D-line that the Chiefs have, which was right around 16 to 18th, depending what rankings you look at, you take Jones out, take Omenihu out, that's going to be a really weak D-line. So I think Ben Johnson and the Lions are going to get basically whatever they want on the ground. Now, if the game allows them to run, you can certainly see where Gibbs is going to be used in different ways. Montgomery potentially interesting as well. There's a sort of a split within the backfield, and Campbell hasn't been super committed over who he's going to give the most touches to. And so these prop services certainly thinking that it is going to be Gibbs getting the majority of those shares. Let's see what happens with that Montgomery line. He's like high 40s right now in those games recently with Chicago in the last few seasons. It's kind of like a mid-50s guy, so a bit of a different scheme there. But that's certainly an interesting matchup within that. Question from Jeff C. Let's see if I can pull this up in the new software. No idea how to pull that up. But his question in the chat, you can see it in the app right below. Is the hype real in Detroit? Used to being let down by the Lions. Concerned about wide receiver depth, especially with JMO suspension. One injury away from being depleted. Will defense be better? Thanks for your time. Jeff C., thanks for your time joining the stream here, along with 230 others. Numbers picking up. My question about Detroit in general is where does the improvement go? Like, where are they going from here? Last year, they were 7th in offense. I don't have notes, so these are just numbers that I'm pulling out of my mind as I think back to all the preseason work that I was done. But they were 7th or 8th on offense, and defensively, they were near the bottom of the league. I think it's inevitable we're going to see defensive improvement. I don't think it's going to be substantial. I think defensively, they're probably going to be 23, 24 at the end of the year. But on offense, again, Jeff, like you're saying, you're going to need everything to kind of go their way, and you're going to need to get as much, if not more, out of this offense versus what you did a year ago. And my kind of question within this is, okay, so let's say you're looking at the Lions offense. You go, there's going to be improvement. Maybe they go from 7th to 3rd, right? And you're really bullish on them. You say, okay, their defense, that's going to be an average unit within the league. Well, you know who's been a top 3 offense and an average defense the last 5 years? Kansas City Chiefs. So, like, when I'm thinking about, like, Lions improvements, 9.5, 10 is their win total. Like, how much higher can they go? It's asking a lot to get a lot out of that offense and defense collectively over the course of a season. And again, you're kind of putting them in that Chiefs category. Look at the spread on Thursday night. You're looking at the Chiefs right around the 6-point favorite across the board at the moment. And so, I mean, it kind of paints the picture for you overall. In terms of other things on this game, Chiefs offense, lots out of camp and preseason about the wide receivers, how much depth they have. I remember talking with Eric Eager from PFF. Now he's with Sumer Sports. He was always on this a couple years ago about how important in the NFL today wide receiver 3 and 4 is. And it's a really good indicator of success. Now, you don't have to take a stance to say the Chiefs offense is going to be great, but this is a Chiefs depth chart that you look, and arguably the best wide receivers 3, 4, 5, and 6 collectively in the league. That depth is very, very real, and Andy Reid can certainly get a lot out of it. So I think that's going to be a massive test for Detroit. But just kind of the one note on this game, think about how fun it's going to be to watch. You have Ben Johnson, who in PFF, he was rated the number 1 play caller in the NFL this offseason. The entire news cycle in sports stops when it's Andy Reid off of a bye. Here you have Andy Reid with 4 months to prepare. And so we're going to have just offensive play calling brilliance between these two guys on Thursday, and that's going to make for a fun game. That's why we're seeing the total all the way up at 54. Lots of questions coming in. Chris, commentary on the Monday Night Football game, Bills versus Jets. Oh, yeah, there's commentary. We'll get to it. Matthew Bonvie, pardon me if I'm getting the names wrong. Adam, do you think Sean Payton will be able to get things going for Denver? Let's touch on that Denver game a little bit later. It's the first afternoon game within the rotation. We'll get to that in a bit. Interesting Dallas comment. Lots of people watching LSU, Florida State. That's going to be a fun one as well. A couple more sort of high-level questions here that I see that I think are going to be answering. Jets Pete, which team do you think the books are underrating the most in terms of weekly point spreads? I think that it's Cleveland. I would strongly disagree with that Cleveland hype, and I don't think you have to look much further than what's going on within week 1. When you look at sort of collective power rankings that are sort of aggregating stuff on the RAS app today, I had a good post about looking at aggregate power rankings, and Cincinnati in some ratings is as high as number 1. There's a set of rankings that has them number 1 that's very well respected. Cleveland in a lot of those rankings, just right above average. You're looking at this before that Burrow news was, even after it was out, to be honest, the Bengals were still a short favorite. Even in the first half now, that Bengals line is quite interesting too, from how sort of what it's saying when you're looking at this, not putting a lot of stock in home field advantage with so much familiarity. I think the Browns, if anything, are being a little bit overrated relative to where they are sort of within a lot of the rankings that I respect. So I don't know if I agree with that. In terms of which team do I think is being most underrated for the weekly point spreads, I'll save that one for later. I think we might have something on that come out in a couple of weeks, but very good question. I almost bit on it, but we'll save that one for a little bit later. I'll hint at some as we go through as well. I'll take a couple stances. If you asked me a couple weeks ago, it was probably Baltimore, and I'd say that pretty confidently, but changing tune a little bit with the Ravens, which we'll touch on in just a second. A couple more high-level ones. I like to see Seattle take a step forward this season. Offense is better after drafting JSN, Charbonnet. Their defense was worst in the NFL last year, so they have nowhere to go but up, in my opinion. Definitely wasn't worst last season. Exactly where they finished off the top of my mind. Offense is going to be better. Absolutely. I think that JSN injury is massive. With Smith and Jigba on the field, that'll finally give the Seahawks a legitimate 3 wide receiver set that they can run. Last year, one of the highest rates of 2 tight end usage, one of the highest rates of 3 tight end usage. If you add that third receiver in, frees up Lockett a lot, frees up Metcalf a ton in the red zone. Smith and Jigba looked like he got along very well with Geno in some of the preseason limited sort of samples that we got from that. So I think he's going to be a really good fit and make a big difference. In terms of the back out of UCLA, Pete just seems to be drafting a running back every single season when he can. And so it's easy to get excited about it. But I actually think that we might see the Seahawks run a little bit less than they have in years past, which Russ fans that might be watching are a little bit frustrated to hear. But I think that JSN within that offense is really going to open things up. So I think I agree with you, Gerald, liking Seattle to take a step forward. Dan, Chargers defense overrated. I would strongly agree with that. I think pass rush obviously going to be very good. But again, you're just sort of doing that Chargers thing that's the same old every year, where you see the name talent at the first level, you assume it's going to be good, and it just kind of applies into all these ratings that we're seeing, and it jacks the Chargers price way up, and then it's just disappointment all season long. Offensively, they're going to be amazing, but defensively, Dan, I certainly agree with that being overrated. Crazy Carl, Chiefs might have bigger bodies on the interior D-line that could keep guards off linebackers in the run game, but offer almost nothing in the pass game. Don't know the size of what's going to be in that middle of the line without Jones off the top of my head, so I'll take your word for that one. But I think it's going to be a struggle both ways for the Chiefs D-line quite a bit. Dustin says Chargers wide receiver is also very good. Yes, that's going to be a lot of fun, especially if Johnston can make it work. It was really high on him in the sort of camp notes during camp, and then preseason that's kind of the hype's tailed off just a little bit. But if that can be something that carries over, that's going to be pretty fantastic. What is the best stadium in the NFL? MetLife, where the Jets play, especially when it's green and white and not blue and the other team is in there. But that's an easy one. DT plus the points. Power rankings or power ratings? There is a difference. What's the difference? I think it's the Canadian accent getting taken over. Travis Watson is cooked. I mean, we have. When are we going to see something from him? It's last preseason. It was him off of this time away. Here it's going to work. He looked awful in the preseason last year. He comes back, plays 6 regular season games. Didn't look good. This preseason, he was getting left in extra drives at the end when all of the other teams in the league were sitting their guys because they wanted him to score. And even that was a struggle. Their one scoring drive was 19 yards off a turnover. And then it was against 2s and 3s that he was able to finally lead the team down. There's nothing showing that it's not a significant drop-off. I mean, guys don't miss that much time, come back, and then all of a sudden click. We haven't seen that really ever, and everyone just assuming that it's going to work. I think that's a big ask. Cage, tell me about Carolina. Even though you just said wide receiver 3-4 equates to success, that's where Carolina has a deficit, but they have pieces. No. Ted Wynn is one of my favorite NFL writers. I love all the stuff that he puts together. He had a really good piece a couple days ago about how the Panthers have no speed at wide receiver. And the rebuttal in a lot of the comments, which I love to read too, was that DJ Chark is the speed guy. Wynn rebutted by saying that Chark was, I think, 3rd or 4th worst league-wide in separation per route run a year ago. Carolina has Marshall as well, who's a good speed guy, but both Chark and Marshall are hurt. So in terms of like a preseason takeaway from the Panthers, to answer your question, nobody was getting open. And I think without those two guys on the field, that could look really bad. So status uncertain for week 1. We've seen that total, which now we're looking at Panthers, Falcons, that next game on the rotation. Open 43, down as low as 39.5. There's been multiple services releasing the under. There's been pro bettors on the under. That's been bet one way the last 3 weeks. That Panthers wide receiver situation is certainly factoring into that. Now, of course, you see Bryce Young struggle in preseason. What I'd say about Young is I think I'm giving him a bit of a pass. In week 1, he played the Jets, who were in their second game. Robert Saleh was obsessed all preseason about getting his D-line playing to its highest potential. He was legitimately trying to win games with his D-line. So that was a brutal matchup for Young to debut against. Week 2, he played the Giants. And you get Wink Martindale, who all he does is blitz. And so he played the starters against Young and the Panthers. That was a mess for him as well. So in terms of what Young faced in the preseason, I mean, that was as difficult as any quarterback league-wide had it in terms of the effort and sort of focus that he was getting from opposing defensive coordinators. So I think that he'll be just fine. But again, watch those wide receivers, KH. That's a big one. Gambling Joe, good name there. Jags line seems short against the Colts. What do you think? Current number there, Jags -5. That's actually been bet up, open 3.5, and has been bet up. Curious, Joe, what's making you think that it's short? Is that just the stance you're taking? One thing I'd say is that obviously there's Richardson making his debut for the Colts. I don't know if the progression that he showed during his time in the preseason, missed the second game but played the other ones, I thought that was pretty meaningful. He had that awful pick on his first play in his first series that I think sort of made the rounds on social media and skewed things. As he settled into that first game, thought he progressed really well. And then in the third game, willing to use his legs, was a terrific runner, throws. I mean, guys, as soon as that ball left his hand, you didn't know if it was going to be something spectacular or a disaster. And a couple discussions I had elsewhere, I equated it to Jameis Winston in 2019, the year he went 30-30. Not comparing the athleticism. I'm not saying Jameis is in that category, but it had that same sort of feel watching Richardson in the preseason that Jameis had, where he let the ball go And as the camera's catching up, you're like, oh no, what's going to happen? And you're just waiting for something ridiculous. That's the feeling I get with Richardson. I mean, every single pass that he threw was as hard as he could throw it and was just completely throwing caution to the wind into tight windows. And so I think that's going to be fun. So I see what you're meaning by that potentially, but that Jags number has already been bet up quite a bit. So that's noticeable. Michael Clark, as this was supposed to be a go through the board, now we're getting into questions. So this is a lot of fun. Maybe we'll have sort of a mid-show pivot. Some good ones piling into the chat. Michael Clark, Giants homer here, but love the steps that they took last year. Regression or progression this year? What if it's the same? What if they don't have to do either? We're just obsessed with these luck metrics from year to year. It's every NFL preview. It's Bill Barnwell on ESPN blasting it all over. He's brilliant. I love the articles. But, I mean, everybody talks about luck metrics every single year. Sportsbooks know about it too, right? Because this is usually a situation when I was young and growing up, if the Giants had a season like they did a year ago with the fourth quarter comebacks and the one-score games going their way, and all the bounces that they got all season and the overachievement, all of that, you would have saw the Giants go from 7.5 last year to probably like 9 flat this year for the win total. This year, it's the exact same. And so there's this really common stance. It's like, well, the Giants are going to regress because of all the stuff that happened last year. The expectations are the same this year as they were last year. I love Daboll. I love Kafka. I think when you have a great head coach and OC combo like those two, you're going to get a lot of those bounces and luck going your way. In the same way that Minnesota went from Zimmer to O'Connell, all the bounces went their way. Well, he's a hell of a coach and a hell of a play caller. So, of course, you're going to get things going better your way than when you have Mike Zimmer, who's 72 years old and dating models and focusing only on the defense and throwing the offense away because he doesn't care about it. Like, of course, good things are going to happen when you're scoring points and the play calling becomes more efficient. And so I don't think it's either. I think the expectations on the Giants are fair. I think they're right. I think the week 1 line is quite interesting for a number of reasons, which maybe if we get some more questions coming in, we can dive into a little bit further. Sean Gibbons, Vikings a sneaky pick to win the NFC. Detroit unproven in a poor division. Defense should be well improved with Brian Flores. I don't know if I agree with Detroit being unproven. I think they proved a lot last year, taking that leap, some really good pieces. I get the sentiment of them being a sneaky pick for what I just said. You have the O'Connell fact. Like, the O'Connell factor matters. They got a lot of good pieces, obviously, on offense with Justin Jefferson. You add in Addison. There's a lot of good pieces on Minnesota. So, again, we're seeing them with the same expectations. I wouldn't be running to bet against Minnesota in terms of sort of just because of those luck metrics. What I'll say about Flores, insanely aggressive, all camp, all preseason, wants to blitz. Ed Donatel last year was as soft and vanilla and basic of a defensive coordinator as there was in the league. To go from that style of play last year to Brian Flores, who just wants everybody up front, wants to disguise blitzes, wants to bring pressure. The change in aggression is as drastic as we've seen year to year for any team almost ever that I can remember. And so that's going to lead to, I think, a lot of variance for the Vikings, forcing them to score a lot more. Question here regarding the Arizona Cardinals, which I think is really, really good as well. The Cardinals are the lowest I have rated a week 1 team since I started doing power ratings. There we go. Someone else is using ratings. Just how bad do you think they will be? Well, looks like Clayton Tune is going to get to start week 1. What does that mean? Time will tell. But I think what they've done recently has sort of really tipped us off to what their mindset is going to be. And so obviously the Colt McCoy situation I thought was handled very poorly. I think there's really good indications here that Murray's going to be held out longer than is sort of being hinted at. Nothing confirmed. Let's see about that. That's just speculation on my part. You're going to go to Clayton Tune very likely in week 1. I think that's potentially a very difficult spot to introduce a non-veteran quarterback going on the road to Washington to face that defensive line in an atmosphere that the ownership for Washington has sort of made a point to show off and make sort of clear that this is new ownership. And so I don't know what the urgency was to ditch McCoy and kind of send Tune to the slaughter in week 1. Defensively, they trade away their best defensive talent. Isaiah Simmons, he's gone, had a ton of tackles last year, was super versatile, obviously a top draft pick for him just a couple years ago. He's gone. You now lose your starting center. for an indefinite amount of time. I mean, it just keeps getting worse for Arizona. And then you have Petzing, the offensive coordinator, that says, let's run the ball more. Let's be different than what we were from the air raid. You're just going to be jamming James Conner into a bad offensive line in front of him. And so a rating I saw had them about a touchdown worse than an average team. That was the aggregate number. I think we could definitely see that become a lot worse. I don't think it'll be like Miami Dolphins bad a couple of years ago where they were getting like 20 or 21 on the road at Dallas. We could probably threaten that territory if it continues to progress as bad as it's looking. But let's see how that sort of defensive shift in mentality with this head coach really doesn't come to fruition. That could get really, really ugly. James Rivoli, pardon me again if I'm saying it wrong. What short home dogs are you eyeing week 1? Steelers, Jets, Giants, Browns. Who is the most undervalued in the market right now? Save that one for later. Bryce Miller, do you like the Steelers' chances to go over 8.5 wins? There was another question I got on Twitter, pardon me for not having the name, and it said, why don't you pay more attention to these season-long trends like the Tomlin 500 thing? I think a lot of that is priced in. When it comes to the Steelers specifically, I don't have a strong opinion. I know internally within the group, a couple guys are big Steelers fans and really were speaking highly of them. And I don't want it to like equate to a season-long opinion, but they're seeing things and upside with Pickett and Pickens and this offense that I'm not seeing. And I think that's part of the beauty of working within a group. There's contradictory in the opinions. And so, again, I don't have a strong Steelers opinion. I think 8.5 is right. I know that's a bad answer for a live stream. You want me to take a stance, but just not a strong take on the Steelers one way or the other. But I very seldom this offseason from anyone I speak with at work or elsewhere have heard someone said, I'm very anti-Steelers. I want no part of it. So it's been a lot more positive than negative in that regard. Patrick Barber, people sleeping on the Bills. You can't sleep on a team that's rated and priced that high. Don't agree with that, but maybe there's just talking points that are going on elsewhere. Something I'd say about the Bills last season, how much of an impact did the elbow injury have? How much of an impact this year will McDermott taking over the defense have with this extra assumed responsibility? Is he going to sort of change the way that the offense operates indirectly with Ken Dorsey? There's going to be a mandate to maybe run more. I think there's a big outlook for James Cook season long. He's going to have, I think, a very impactful season. I think the offensive shift to having Kincaid and what they're calling 11.5 personnel, I think that's going to make for maybe a less explosive but much more efficient offense. I think the Bills in many ways copying the Kansas City Chiefs the last couple of years. Think back 3-4 years ago, the Chiefs were all 3 wide receiver sets, spreading everything out. And last year, the Chiefs led the league in usage of 3 wide receiver sets. We're number 2 to Minnesota in 2 tight end usage. And so Kansas City went from spread and light formations on offense to really being operating out of heavy personnel a lot. Buffalo last year at times very predictable, operating out of those 3 wide receiver sets. So as you're watching week 1 against the Jets, see what they're doing with Cook. Are they using him more? Is there more of a traditional ground game? See what they're doing with the formations. That's going to be a pretty good tell all the way around. Continuing on as these questions come in. Thank you for firing in all these questions. 72 in dating models is bad, BD says in regards to the Zimmer comment. I forget how old he is. No, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying he was focused on the defense. The offense was an afterthought. You bring in O'Connell, who's focused on the offense. Defense was an afterthought. Now O'Connell gets his guy in Flores. He says, go do what you want with the defense. I'll just score enough points on offense. It's just a much better situation than what you had when Zimmer was in there. So that's important. Ryan C. just Googled his girlfriend. It's a pretty ridiculous story if you're going to dig into that. Chris Gray, are you going to be using Telegram this season? I thought it was by far the best way for your industry to send communications. No more Telegram. Any of the work I do is contributing in likely a very small way to what the team at Red Angle Sports ultimately does. I will not be sending out pics myself on Telegram. I won't be posting stuff independently as well on Twitter as far as pics. I will be doing a lot of media. A lot of it's obviously going to be here for RAS, but I'll also be doing 3 to 4 usual media spots around the industry. And then, of course, the daily podcast, The Simple Handicap on Apple and Spotify. I'll have that every morning. Starts tomorrow morning. We'll be doing it every day, every morning at 5 a.m. or earlier till the Super Bowl. So you'll be able to listen to that. If you haven't listened to it, 8 to 12 minutes every single morning, keeps you up to date with the market, tells you what you need to know, and you can keep up with it. Andy A, Cowboys' best all-up team in last 5 or so years. Cowboys fan needing some words of affirmation. What is an all-up team? I don't know what that is. Here's what I'll say about the Cowboys. I think it's the best roster both sides of the football Dallas has had in a very long time. So Andy A, for words of affirmations, I think you should feel very, very good about the outlook for the Dallas Cowboys. On offense specifically, I think the wide receiver depth that they have is as good as it's ever been for Dak. They can legitimately have 5 wide receivers now with the addition of Cooks at number 2. Gallup settles into a very good number 3. Then you have Tolbert and Turpin behind them. This is a very different offensive look and offensive roster for the Cowboys. I think the removal of Zeke from that offense is going to have a big impact because you kind of look at it. When we think about the Cowboys the last year or two, it's like, okay, you have Kellen Moore. Over the course of the season, he becomes predictable. Jerry Jones has this mandate. He wants to run it more. How does that tie in? Where do we see that sort of meshing within this offense? And you always had this run play to Zeke or a screen pass or getting him involved in the pass game. There was kind of this governor on this offense. It just slowed him down and took the air right out of the whole team. Even if you get that same thing now where there's that emphasis to run, you're going to have Tony Pollard, which in every way is better than what you got with Zeke. And so there's kind of this out now for Cowboys fans where if you get the same old, you have Tony Pollard, who's going to be a hell of a lot better in every way than Zeke. If you get something new and different, you now have more legitimate threats at wide receiver than you have ever had. So all of that works out very well for the Cowboys. The addition of Stephon Gilmore into the secondary really is going to free up this pass rush. Not that the pass rush needs more help, one of the best in the entire NFL, but now you're not going to have Diggs, who is like the ultimate boomer bust corner, got a lot better and sort of not gambling last year. But Gilmore is going to allow this team to play a lot more man defense. And that's going to allow the guys up front to bring a little bit of extra help, really cause a lot of trouble for opposing quarterbacks. And so I think the Cowboys, both sides of the football, very good team to look at, and a team that's certainly been looked at by a lot of other pros, being bet over. That win total went up. I think we're going to see a lot of Cowboys love. Amazing here, 30 minutes in, we're still holding 200 people. That's very good to see. Appreciate you guys spending your Sunday night. Patrick English, daily podcast back tomorrow. Yes, it is. 5 a.m. or earlier. You will see those back on the podcast feed, Apple or Spotify. Ryan Roberts, what was your favorite off-season move by a team this year? Miami Dolphins bringing in Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator. I don't know if I was allowed to go coaching staff with that question, but I think that is going to be a huge impact for that offense. We talked about Minnesota and how that switch from Donatel to Flores was impactful. But I think from a sort of beneficiary standpoint, what Fangio and that defense could do for Miami, who kind of had the remnants of the Flores system hanging around with what they were doing last year, it's going to be a huge shift. But now you have Mike McDaniel, who's one of the best offensive minds and play callers in the NFL running the offense. That's very, very good with a roster that some of the roster evaluators out there say is the best in the league. And you add Vic Fangio to the other side, the Ramsey loss is impactful, but I mean, this is one of the best defensive coordinators and defensive play callers in the league. So you kind of have it from both sides now for Miami, and there's not that question mark about what the defense can do. That is a loaded Dolphins team on both sides of the football. So I think that Fangio impact could be absolutely fantastic. William Herman, nice size crowds in here. Smash that like button. Appreciate it if you do. 36 people already giving it the thumbs up. See if we do more than that. Crazy Carl, anyone else concerned about play caller Mike McCarthy? Again, this is kind of the thing. Like, what can Mike McCarthy do wrong from this is going to get, people are going to bring this back on me. I know they are. But what I'm trying to say is, like Mike McCarthy can't really screw this up. If he goes run heavy, it's what everybody's been calling for 3 years, where Pollard's going to get more touches. If he goes super conservative with the pass game, you have all these guys that can be just ridiculous in space. And if he does the right thing, you have as good of a list of offensive weapons as there is league-wide. So it's a really, really good spot for him to be in. And I think it's even more so better. I know obviously in Green Bay, he did a lot of really slowed things down, was conservative. But again, like we just haven't seen that slow down pace style of offense that we have. He was the fastest offense in the league as soon as he got into Dallas. It was a huge change for him from Green Bay. So I don't think that he can screw this up. And I know someone's going to clip this and bring it back, but I think Dallas and the personnel that they have on offense just gives him a lot of outs in terms of what he can do and not sort of screw up. BD, is Adam having a good show? I don't know. This is a Q&A format. We're getting peppered here off the spot. Sean, 1982. Who are some tight ends to keep an eye on for first TD this year? I see what you're trying to do with some of that. Tight ends to keep an eye on for first touchdown. Part of me wonders a little bit if a lot of this tight end stuff is getting priced in. Really, for the first time ever, I'm seeing a lot of services offering anytime touchdown specific services. I know that there's a lot of prop groups. There's about 4 main prop groups that release stuff. They're releasing stuff earlier than I've ever seen before. I feel like a lot of the really obvious prop stuff is getting bet earlier. And now there's going to be a lot of people trying to get out ahead of it in terms of being the first to post about it. And so I know this isn't answering your question, but for a long time, there were a lot of tight ends that were really undervalued. And I know your question had a specific wording that I'm not going to acknowledge. But in terms of a tight end, and it's going to be an obvious one, but just a full-on tight end breakout this season, we have to go back to Daboll and Kafka and look at Darren Waller. And I wonder a little bit about his numbers that we see in the prop market. I think they're going to be inflated, but he's been a guy that's missed so much time the last couple years. I think it's going to be really hard, not just for bettors, but also for bookmakers to find what the right number for him is, because he's missed so much time that's really skewed his numbers. He's dealt with some weird quarterback sort of situations. It's obviously been Derek Carr, but there's been play caller changes. There's been philosophy changes along with those injuries. And now he goes into a spot in New York where Daboll and Kafka are drawing everything up for him. They had that preseason drive in game 2 that was ridiculous. When you watch how often he was in motion, the different formations that he was being used out of, that's going to be a guy that's going to get a ton of attention too. The one guy that I would potentially stay away from, I think for Kincaid in Buffalo, everybody's assuming that that's going to work right off the bat and be a big impact. I think it's going to take time for him to fit within that system in Buffalo to figure out how they're going to use him, especially within the red zone. So I think that's going to be a guy that gets a lot of attention that I'm not so sure that I'm jumping to sort of bet right away early. So that's something that I would point out. Jeffrey Brogan, do you think having 2 new offensive tackles starting for the Chiefs will have a negative impact on the usual efficiency of their offense? No, I think it's the opposite. I think getting Orlando Brown out of there is a big win for the team. I think it's only an upgrade across the board for what the Chiefs have now. If anything, I think the offensive line is only going to get better initially in this first game we see on Thursday. It's going to improve the rest of the week. And so that's a big plus for the Chiefs. I don't think that is a negative impact in any way. David Romano, any starting running backs you think could be replaced early on in the season? Replaced as in benched, or what are we going to see? We just talked about Detroit. You have that split between Gibbs and Montgomery. I think that's going to be interesting. Let's see what the Bucs do with Rachaad White. His numbers are through the roof. Props, season-long stuff. He benefited so much from Brady a year ago. For those of you who are into Telegram, we're betting his rushing overs at like 17.5 yards in the midseason. The expectations for White this year to me are insane for what that offense is going to look like. In terms of replaced, if you give me more definition on replaced, that would be a good one. What team will have the quickest play calling? Mr. Kevin the Fox. Good question. I think a lot of signs point to Dallas playing very quickly. I think a lot of signs point to the Chargers playing very quickly as well. And there's obviously some relationship there between those two teams the last couple of years. Larry Mickelson, Walker is a head case. I'm guessing you meant Waller. Clarify that. But again, like you think the situation for Waller has been brutal the last couple of years. And so I think that you could look at almost anybody who may have been in a bad situation with a bad team going through injuries. You put them with Dayball and Kafka, they're going to look like a completely different player. So I think that's significant. Rob, DA, do you think Chris Jones and Nick Bosa play week 1? On Jones specifically, if for a couple days there last week, it looked like things were trending well and there was a chance that he was going to play. It seems now like that is less and less likely to happen as every single minute goes by. So I don't have a take on Bosa. For Jones, I would lean towards no. John Hudson, Elks and OT, are you proud of their recent performance? Hold steady. Trey Ford's coming on strong. Hackney Haunts, thoughts on Jay Williams, Broncos, receptions prop for week 1. I haven't seen anything posted. If there has been, let me know. What I'll say in regards to Javonte Williams, just stop for a second and think about what Sean Payton did in the Saints organization with Alvin Kamara for the last couple seasons that he was there. He sort of reinvented the running back position in terms of what he wanted out of it. We saw Williams sort of obviously get hurt, but everything in the camp so far preseason has been trending in the right direction. Everything that Payton has said is that he really wants to integrate him into this offense. Russell Wilson last year had his highest ever target percentage to running backs. For a while in Seattle, he was a guy that never threw to running backs. Seeing his arm strength decrease a little bit. We're seeing him more willing to throw to running backs. Last year, there was emphasis on it. This year, that emphasis is only going to increase. Running back receiving props, especially to the over, are very difficult ones to hit because you really need the game state to go the right way in order to get those targets and get those opportunities. Those are bets that really pick up a lot of sort of receptions, 2-minute drills, late half in the second half. A lot of those situations where teams maybe are trailing, it's kind of contradictory, right? Because you're like, if an offense is going to have success and backs are going to get receiving opportunities to go over, that means the offense is going to have to be doing really well. But when you look at where a lot of those targets come from, again, 2-minute drills, or when teams are trailing and you have this prevent look and backs are sort of sitting in front, that's where those receptions get stacked up. The Broncos week 1 against the Raiders, decent sized favorite at home, very likely to be leading. But when you think about how Payton uses backs, Williams might be one of the few exceptions league wide that legitimately has a lot of plays drawn up for him in the receiving game. And the way that Russ is trending is certainly supporting that as well. So that could be an interesting prop. But again, I haven't seen it posted. Aaron K, are you watching the Riders game? I am not. Moved out to the coast in BC last week, all set up for football. Telus guy just left. TV's a mess. Trying to sort that up. But even if it was given the option, I would probably be on LSU, FSU as well. Sean Gibbons, do you have advice on particular numbers for teasers? Is it a good idea to tease RAS picks if I miss the initial value? Good question to send a direct message about in terms of missing movement, but in general, that is not a good strategy to impose, especially after things have already gone far. But if you want more details on that, go into RAS Picks, send a direct message, and maybe we can give you some more specific numbers. And at Ski, will Sky Moore be a consistent weapon on the Chiefs offense this year? Do you think something like 50 yards, 0.4 TD chances on a game-by-game basis this year? Andy Reid in March said that Sky Moore was going to be the guy to take the leap. He then sort of after minicamp and stuff came out and said Sky Moore is impressing him. Before camp, he said Sky Moore is impressing him. So you have this trajectory of Andy Reid with positive comments for Sky Moore. Then there was kind of about 2-3 weeks ago, this growing sort of sport. Well, if Tony's out, Sky Moore is going to be the guy with all these young receivers for the Chiefs. Sky Moore is going to have that breakout year. We're now getting to a spot where Tony's coming back. There's a lot of wide receivers who are standing out in Chiefs camp. And now you have Sky Moore. I actually just looked before we came on. Correct me if I'm wrong, but his receiving prop for game 1 against Detroit is almost at 50 yards for the game. And so you're asking, is that sustainable? Again, he's another guy, and similar to what I just said with White. Last year, we were betting him over 18.5 receiving yards for the game in some of those primetime game situations. And so if he gets into this kind of number 2 role within the offense, there's going to be a lot of targets and opportunities his way. but I kind of in my mind see the situation where the Chiefs offense gets spread out quite a bit and all these wide receivers start competing. The one positive that Sky Moore really has, along from the Andy Reid endorsements earlier in the year, is it's always been really difficult for young guys to break through really early on in Andy Reid's systems. And so there might be a little bit more trust and reliability with him early. And so that might be something to watch for, especially as this pricing goes on throughout the course of the season. Lavelle Mosley, are we sleeping on the Bucs winning the South? Who has them winning? I mean, if they get a full season, okay, we'll take a step back. Here's what I'll say about the Buccaneers. When I did my first thoughts previews back in July, Dave Canales came over as the offensive coordinator for the Bucs. And his early press conferences were basically, I want to devalue the quarterback position in an offense. I want to focus on the run game, and I want to use our offensive line to dictate games. I heard that, and I was like, this is nonsense. Like, you lose Tom Brady, one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. You have Dave Canales taking over as the offensive coordinator. He's saying he wants to devalue the quarterback position. This is nuts. None of this makes sense. And early on in preseason, when it was Mayfield versus Trask, like the Jets game, he didn't see anything happening. There was just nothing going on. There was a drive in the last preseason game for the Bucs where Baker Mayfield had the starting offensive weapons on the field outside of Mike Evans. And I'm watching it. I'm like, this looks pretty good. I'm not saying pretty good in the sense that the Bucs are an above average. I'm not going anywhere there. But I think back to last year when Mayfield was with the Rams and he was leading some of those drives, not the game-winning one. I forget exactly who they were playing, but there were spots where you're like, this guy can still throw when he's given time. He looks pretty good, and he doesn't have much to work with. But you put him with Mike Evans, you put him with Chris Godwin, and some of these depth wide receivers that the Bucs have. If the Bucs are a team that's trailing, like, you can really see how this offense could actually be kind of decent. And again, I'm not using like big leaps here for the Bucs. I'm not saying they're winning the AFC South. No, I don't think anybody is sleeping on them to win the division. I don't think they're going to win the division. I'm much more confident in either the Saints or the Falcons doing so. But I don't think that the Bucs offense is going to be as bad as maybe it's being made out to be. And so I think that's real. Mr. Q says the Atlanta hype is insane. It's something I wonder is within sort of the betting space. First of all, how many opinions are sort of derivative opinions where somebody who's doing content or creating things see another person do something, they take that for their own, and then they sort of say it again in their own way. How much of it is that versus you as someone who's on the other side, not creating? Like, how many different options do you have to go to places where you come up with an opinion? Because I'll see one or two people have a stance on something, but they're one or two people that are popular. And then someone will say, well, this is way overhyped. Everybody's on it. Everybody's betting this. And I'm like, well, is everybody doing it? Or is it like one or two people who saw this and have an audience and that's where it's coming from? So obviously we have a position on the Falcons. So that's maybe somebody out there is going to say that sounds very disingenuous. But I don't think that relative to the Saints and how many people are looking at that team, that the Falcons are getting sort of more overhyped from that. And then I would say, again, like relative to what? A lot of the sort of talk around the Falcons has been to either make the playoffs or to win their division. And I think with the landscape of the NFC as a whole, you have like three really good teams, and then the rest are all just kind of this mediocre bunch. And so anytime that someone makes a stance for like a mid-tier NFC team, it sounds like a really hot take because you hear it and you're like, that could make sense. And the crux of a lot of it is all these teams play really bad schedules. The rest of the NFC sucks. And if they do okay, they have a really good chance of making the playoffs. And so I think a lot of that is getting interpreted as maybe overhyped because there's like 8 teams that you can make a reasonable case for being decent. And their prices are much different than sort of comparable ranked teams from like 4 to 9 in the AFC who are all priced like top tier NFL teams. And so I think that kind of skews it a little bit overall. Lavelle Mosley, who do you like for Rookie of the Year? I thought Smith and Jigba was a really good bet post-draft at 10-1. Obviously, the wrist injury is probably going to negate that. But I think in terms of a rookie impact, unless you're looking at Bijan specifically outside of the quarterbacks. I think the impact that Smith and Jigba could have within that Seahawks offense is greater than an impact that other rookies are going to have league-wide. And so let's keep an eye on that wrist injury. I don't think he plays week 1. That probably kills the rookie of the year potential for that. That injury was very untimely, but I think that he's going to be a big impact within that Seahawks offense. We're at the 45-minute mark. If you have more week 1 game-specific questions, I think that's a good way to take this. For the remainder, I'll get to a couple Twitter ones as well. But we see Clutch Sports Apparel, thoughts on Green Bay, Chicago week 1. Everyone that I know that's in the professional betting space seems to love Green Bay. My stance on the Packers is I don't know if I'm fully there with a lot of the opinions. I know that Love has obviously had extra time within that quarterback system. But again, I can't ignore the fact that you have offensive linemen speaking about this as a rebuilding year, and you have a head coach who's saying the exact opposite. I think this whole regime change with Rodgers being removed from this franchise and just thinking that the Packers are going to progress and pick up on that is a really, really big ask. And I think the miscommunication and how you're hearing different things from different parts shows just sort of a misalignment within this team as a whole. When we get to the Bears side, well, now we're seeing Justin Fields being one of the most popular MVP bets. You're talking about hype. There's legitimate hype there. I did a Fields video, and we had a bet on his rushing yards under. It got misinterpreted a little bit. But what I would say about the Bears is that's a team that reminds me a lot of the Trubisky year where he got all that MVP hype and everybody thought that that was going to work as well. And so I think relative to where these teams are going to be priced for the first 4 weeks of the season past this game, I think both are going to be really overvalued. In terms of this total, there's been a lot of love for the under. The Bears last year, for those of you who listen to the podcast, it was Bears overs every single week once they got rid of all those defensive parts. If you think that the Bears offense is going to be improved, you probably really like what DJ Moore can open up for this team to be, again, an over team to start the year. In terms of the Packers, I think the pace is going to be a big impact. You have Rodgers, who really slowed down the game a lot. You have Matt LaFleur, who really likes to use pre-snap motion. That slows teams down too because they can't get to the line and snap it right away. So there's no way that Love is going to be as demanding and commanding at the offensive line as what we saw from Rodgers. So for me, that's going to speed up the Packers. The question is, will Mike LaFleur, with his pre-snap motion rates, slow down the team and sort of negate that speed uptick that you will have from not having Rodgers? And so the answer that bettors are showing within the market so far is that both of these teams more shaded towards the under. I think there's a chance that over the course of the season, we actually see the Packers, who for the last number of seasons been one of the slowest team, if not the slowest team year after year, could actually speed up and play a lot quicker. It's like a question of, well, if you're playing quicker, but you have Rodgers to Love kills the efficiency, where does that kind of level out? I think that's going to be pretty impactful overall. Couple more questions. Last year, Jets defense throttled Allen in both games. Why not week 1 at MetLife? So, it's a good question. It's a very fair point. We've seen the Jets get a lot of attention. The Jets defensive line depth, especially at the edge, showed really well in preseason. They've got a lot of potential. Quinnen Williams, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the entire NFL. I think there's a lot here with this defensive line. Can the secondary play to the same level? I'm not sure. The one thing that I would say here is when you're looking at this game, I think there's a ton of reasons to look at and point at for the Jets in terms of why this is a team that could be higher valued. We're seeing that in the point spread, right? They are now a 2.5-point underdog at home. When we think back to the games last year, it was like Bills -10 and then 8.5 back the other way. Obviously, the Jets, like you mentioned, were very competitive within that. I think that this offense is going to take a little bit of time to work. That's my stance. I know the pass to Wilson looked really good. When you look at the preseason reports, Michael Carter was the second most targeted player on the Jets offense all offseason and through camp. So it's like beyond Wilson, where is this offense going? What are we going to see that look like? We haven't seen Dalvin Cook at all within this offense. He was delayed getting back. You have Breece Hall who's hurt. And then you're just assuming that Hackett's going to step in and it's going to work. Like, I get the relationship between Rodgers and Hackett is there, but Hackett as an offensive play caller, his entire career has been garbage. It doesn't matter where he has been. It's been a joke. And so many new faces coming from new places with Hackett as the play caller, just assuming it's going to work, I think is asking a lot. The defensive line is going to be fantastic. The secondary is going to be really good. Robert Salah is going to get a lot from that. But again, it's just asking so much from Rodgers. And on the other side, I look at this game and I think you're getting the Bills at a bit of a discount, and you're giving Ken Dorsey a lot of extra time and prep to sort of get right for what he did see. He obviously didn't see what the Jets offense is going to be, but saw what the Jets defense did to Allen and company twice last year, exactly like you're mentioning. Again, lifelong Jets fan, so there's a lot of feelings behind it. But I just think the Jets offense is going to have to take time to figure it out. And just the assumption that because Rodgers and Hackett know each other, that this is going to work, I think that's a really, really big ask overall. And again, that move was significant, like Crazy Carl said, coming off the 3. So that's pretty big. Lavelle Mosley said, any chance the Texans cover that 10? Ravens been bet up a little bit. Ravens just have a ton of hype with the Monken system. You want to talk again about an offense that might take a little bit of time. Greg Roman had this offensive line and this entire offensive scheme based around that gap blocking scheme. Just switching that year to year, going to Roman, who's going to be very different in that regard, especially off the hop where the preseason games didn't have the starters together. Again, that's a pretty damn big ask that a lot of people, just because of the hype and the Monken press conference and all these great things that he has said, they're just assuming that it is going to work. I know that the Ravens offense over the course of the season is going to be better than the Ravens offenses that we have seen recently. I know that there's going to be improvement. The weapons are better. Lamar is going to be throwing more. There's going to be bigger explosive plays in the pass game. The emphasis and focus is going to change. It's going to be better. But again, just like the Jets, you're just asking a lot to work right off the start with some pretty significant fundamental changes to how this offense operates. And you just didn't get preseason time to see how it could look. And so the Houston Texans, on the other hand, we saw a lot of what their starting offense could look like. For me, in my first take preview about 6 weeks ago, I was looking at the Texans and I said, okay, last year with Pep Hamilton was a disaster. He's an offensive coordinator that labels his system the no-coast offense. So it's like he's trying to be different, but he doesn't know what he's trying to be different from. He just wants to do something different. It didn't work. Get him out of there. So he's out of there. You have Bobby Slowick coming in. If you go through like a podcast search and you look up Bobby Slowick, you have some of the smartest people in the industry talking him up about how great he is. He was a guy that started on the defense, learned the defense. He went to PFF. He was one of their top analysts. There was interviews on Texans podcasts with PFF guys. They're like, this is the smartest guy we've ever seen. And so I'm looking at the Texans offense. I'm like, okay, CJ Stroud comes in, was fantastic in college. He's going to have weapons that aren't good, but you have Slowick, who comes from a San Francisco scheme under Shanahan, who just made whatever quarterback they had in the system work, made it really, really easy for him. First preseason game against New England, Bobby Slowick doesn't know how to take timeouts. Second game against, I forget who they put at the top of my head, gets nothing out of the starting offense. Then you get a little bit of Stroud in the third game, but there's nothing in the entire preseason from the Houston Texans and Bobby Slowick that give me any sort of optimism that that offense is going to work, especially early in the season. I want to rephrase that and say I'm not saying it's not going to work as the season progresses, but early on, it just looked really, really bad and really, really disappointing because I wanted Slowick to come in, look really good in preseason, and then like you're saying, hey, this is a really big number against the Ravens team that's really, really overhyped, especially when you're looking at that total at 45. Well, the Ravens are going to be a team that score a lot of points. The Texans can be right there doing it. Wasn't there, guys. There was nothing there that give me sort of any optimism with Houston. The defensive line and what Demico Ryans was getting out of that defense, and even in the secondary too, that looked pretty promising. And again, Ryans and Robert Salah, very similar guy. And so I'm familiar with what Salah's done with the Jets. They're just great on-field motivators, very animated. They're incredibly invested in every single snap that their defense plays. You saw a lot from the Texans defensive line. I think gives optimism for that defense. And so you hear that breakdown, total was 45. Now it's trending down. You can kind of see why, because what you were hoping you would get from the Texans that maybe justified an over, certainly not there whatsoever. Crazy Carl, any thoughts on the Finns at the Chargers? That's a really interesting game. Chargers a 3-point favorite, total 50.5. From just like a pure sort of totals perspective, you would look at that and you would say that that's really high. Something that I could sort of throw out there to support that. Mike McDaniel comes from the San Francisco scheme, from the Shanahan world of things. That's very much a system that values running plays a lot and gets a ton out of the run game every single season. Last year, Miami obviously dealt with quarterback fluctuation, injuries, guys were in and out of the lineup. That was problematic. But still, Miami threw at the 7th highest rate in the NFL. And when you look back through the history of the San Francisco system, you're just not finding 49ers teams that have that sort of high pass rate. And when I think about what McDaniel has done in the offseason, what he did in the draft, what he did trying to chase Dalvin Cook, what he did try to chase Jonathan Taylor, there's a lot of sort of clues that I see being left out. And then you add in what you saw in the preseason with some of the play calling, and you're looking at this Miami team saying this is a team that's going to run the football a lot more than they did a year ago. They certainly have the depth and the talent to do that effectively. And I just get the feeling that what McDaniel put on the field last year was not a true sort of indication of what he wants this offense to be. Everything coming out of camp around Tua has been positive. He's looked really, really good. He's put a lot of effort into preventing being injured, done a lot of practicing in that regard. I think that's a big sort of plus all the way around for the Dolphins. And it's hard to look at Miami and be like, this is a team that maybe gets into lower scoring game with how many weapons that they have. But that's a team on both sides of the football that I think the offense is going to run a little bit more. And you already heard me talk about Fangio for 10 minutes. Now, the Chargers, on the other hand, we've heard nothing that indicates that that's going to be a team that you're going to be wanting to look at and play a lot of unders. Everything out of camp has been throwing deep, pushing it deep. Herbert, deeper passing than ever. All the receivers love it. Everybody wants Kellen Moore to open it up further. So you kind of have this like contradictory stance within this game specifically. What I'm curious to see with the Chargers is how often are they going to run on early downs? We've heard a million times now, Joe Lombardi slowed down Herbert. His air yards are dead last in the NFL. We've heard all of that. What I don't hear a lot of talk about is how more with the Cowboys, a lot of early down running. Let's see what that looks like. Let's see if he's willing to do everything that he was doing in camp. I think it's one thing in camp in the offseason to have Herbert chucking 60-yard bombs to look good in front of reporters. You get in the game scenario, you have Brandon Staley, who's completely hands-off on the offense. He's telling Moore to go do his things. Let's see what Kellen Moore looks like with no restrictions whatsoever around him. I get the feeling that there's going to be a lot of truth to this deep passing. But let's see what that run game looks like and how frequently that it's going to be used. So that's something that I'll be watching for within that Chargers game. I hope it answers it. If I'm looking at that from a teaser perspective, give me the Dolphins teased up. If you want to pair that with someone, Commanders teased down. I know it's not the traditional teaser. Going to get picked on a little bit, but I think Dolphins with the Commanders in the teaser is a really, really good look overall. Lavelle Mosley, Adam, can we get a potential underdog moneyline winner? If you have one, tell me. I'll be able to relay it here on the show. Everett Jones, what are some good teaser options for week one? Just gave you one. Commanders with the Dolphins. That's a pretty good one. Again, we kind of hinted on the Commanders, Cardinals when we talked about that game. Statement game for Washington. Cardinals are a mess. I think Miami, with that Fangio improvement, going to be very competitive defensively, and that offense is just loaded all the way around. William Herman, how do you, the Rams versus Seahawks -5.5? I'm guessing that's how do I think about it. Kupp, I don't believe he's going to play. I think a second setback within 3 weeks kind of indicates what we're going to get from him. So I think that that's going to be a massive blow for the Rams offense. The Seahawks, there was some known injury news. Witherspoon and Adams on the defense in the secondary. Both of those guys were never expected to play. Last week, it was officially ruled out that both of those guys are not going to be there. But again, how is that impact going to be when you don't have your best wide receiver and one of the best in the league on the field? So I think that gets negated a little bit from the Seattle injury news. We've seen that total come back down. There was a release from a service on the over, took that number up. It's come back the other way. That's sitting at 45 right now. A lot of that sort of fluctuates around the Cooper Kupp news, but that early move was all over. Late move in the last week or so has been one way on the under. And so when I'm looking at that, I think the Rams defense is going to be the worst unit in the entire NFL over the course of the season. I think that's going to be a mess. I think the Rams locker room chemistry issues is going to be a mess as well. I think there's real truth to that and how bad it is on both sides of the football. I question if McVay is actually there. I think he's actually borderline checked out. I don't think we're going to get a great season from McVay. And let's see how long Aaron Donald stays around. And so all negatives for the Rams overall could only look to Seattle in that game. But at 5.5, that's pretty peak pricing all the way around. Bobby, what do you think of 49ers at Pittsburgh? There's been a lot of back and forth within the group on this one. We haven't taken an official stance on that. I'll give you my take. I thought the 49ers ones in preseason looked really, really good. It was just automatic drives in both games. They got to the 2 and the 1 yard line in both of them. There was a penalty and a sack. So it's just weird red zone luck. Otherwise, I think we'd be thinking about the Niners very differently. We would have been saying, okay, there's no limitation on Purdy's arm whatsoever. And all of those concerns are out the window. This is Kyle Shanahan with offensive pieces that are all coming back for a second year, third year in a row for some of them. They're all back. There was no weird stuff happening in the offseason like he's had to deal with. So you have a returning quarterback. You have all these offensive weapons returning. They went down the field twice in 2 different games effortlessly. And it would be only optimism for the 49ers offense. But because of how that sort of happened, and because of the Purdy stuff and how that was reported, and because of the Lance stuff and how that news sort of impacted it, I don't think people are looking at the 49ers and saying that. And I don't think that that's there. And then on the other side, you have the Steelers, who are an all-time preseason juggernaut in the last couple of years because of the QB depth that they have. And the questions for me with the Steelers, as good as they looked in the preseason, well, they've looked that way for the last couple of years. I think the scoreboard certainly is inflating some opinions there. But to me, with the Steelers in this spot at home, they have all these sort of historical factors, home dog, week 1 at home. That's all there and good. But I can't help but feel that there's a little bit more upside with the Niners at this number on the road than there is with the Steelers, who you're going to need something that you haven't seen from them sort of justify this price point. And so, again, no bet on this one. I don't think it's going to make a card either way. I thought the Niners ones looked really, really, really good on offense and what we saw from the preseason. Ryan Roberts, boys versus G-Men on Sunday Night Football breakdown. We already got to that one earlier. Ryan, if you missed it, kind of give my thoughts on both of those teams. Here's what I'll say about this one. These 2 teams played on Thanksgiving a year ago. The Cowboys closed 10.5-point favorites at home in Dallas. We're now at Dallas -3 on the road. Do what you will with home field advantage. Tell me how we're getting to this number. That would be my take on that game, playing it really well. Jay Karma, Lions overhyped. They're legit play at 6.5. Talked about that one. No way am I taking those points here against Kansas City in terms of them being overhyped over the season. I would absolutely agree with it. Ryan, no worries about the repeat. Definitely saying that. Mr. Q, Purdy coming back to earth. Mr. Q, this entire chat, I've been looking up my eye here, contrary to everything that's popular. So it's clearly you're expressing a bit of a personality trait here, going against anything that's being said. I think Purdy coming back to earth is like the easiest offseason take that anybody could possibly have. The rebuttal with that is you could say that about almost any quarterback that's played for Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers in the last 5 seasons. I mean, every single year it's this guy's going to come back to earth. This system's not going to work. He just makes it so easy for any quarterback that more so than any other scheme in the NFL, it doesn't matter who's under center, there's going to be success. And we're going to see how different it looks when you take Jimmy G out of this and put him with the Raiders, and how bad Garoppolo is going to look this season. I think it's just sort of an endorsement for Shanahan overall. Don't be sorry about it. Like the contrary opinions. But to me, that sort of immediate Purdy regression, if there was an arm issue with him, sure. I get it. I see it. I know what you're talking about. But without those limitations, I think he's going to look like how every other quarterback that has fit into this 49ers scheme over the last few years is going to look. Jordan Cole, Tomlin, a great home dog historically. You can look at this West Coast traveling east, the week 1 home underdog, Tomlin as a home underdog. Like, there's so many of these like long-standing trends and historical factors, and almost none of them support San Francisco. There's definitely something to what the sort of meaning behind a lot of these are and the value. I feel like the number personally is a little bit short on San Francisco. I wouldn't be going the other way. Crazy Carl. Even Mullins looked good. Yeah, now Mullins is struggling as a backup in Minnesota. Like, it doesn't matter who you put in the 49ers lineup. They're going to look really, really good. Okay, hour 6 into this. Longer than I thought we would go. There's still 160 people hanging around. Wrap up with a couple just questions that I saw come through on Twitter. I don't want to leave you guys hanging that sent in the questions early. If you're listening, you can catch up to it now. Everyone always says the mailbag is full. The mailbag is actually full. We'll reference real people. You can look them up if you want to judge it. Final nub, Jonathan. Adam, been enjoying your following on Twitter and the content you're doing. Can you please clarify what stat you were referring to when you say on the podcast QBX is X% below expectation? It's not clear to me as I've followed many of your podcasts and summaries. Thank you. That is referring to the ESPN Next Gen stat. They have a giant table, and they chart the probability of a completion occurring when a quarterback throws it, and then they compare it to the actual completion rate that quarterback has. It's on the far right side of the table on the Next Gen stats. I find it really useful because you can take a lot away from how well that quarterback performed in that specific scenario. So that's what I say that on the podcast. That is what it is referring to. TJHKKER. How in the hell do you say that one? Wow. I have no idea what his name is. He goes Will Levis on his Twitter. Good question, though. I always hear you referencing advanced stats, EPA per play, intended air yards, play percentage, trailing, etc. Are there a couple of sites you use to find this stuff? RBSDM.com is a really good website that has been up a lot. I used it for like 3 years. I didn't know it didn't stand for running backs don't matter, but that's what it's for. So Ben runs the site. Everybody knows it for the most part. It's not giving away any secret. I like it because it's so easy to sort. So many sites overcomplicate their stats tables, and it really annoys me. Remember how great the old Yahoo scoreboards used to be when it was just the yellow boxes and you had the plain text and stuff didn't have to load? Ben's site is just you click once, you get the table, and you sort it, and you're done. I'm getting old. I like that. He has a really good site. You can find a lot of that stuff on there as well. It's really, really good. Connor Harden, a name that I can pronounce, a longtime Twitter follower. Really enjoy your podcast. Was wondering, are you still doing it this year? If so, where? Simple Handicap is airing every single morning, 5 a.m. or earlier. Same format, same time, same place, Apple or Spotify. We're going to be doing it each and every season. Cross check, but Czechoslovakia, 131. Chris Cross. Good question, good username. Really enjoy your work. Thanks for all the content you put out. I was wondering where would be the best spot for collection of advanced stats and data. Warren Sharp used to have stuff available on his website, but no longer does from what I can tell. Warren Sharp's website used to be just a direct copy of Sports Info Solutions. He would just pull all the data and paste it as his own. I know there were references, but it was kind of presented in that manner. The API feed that was given to that, from what I understand, has been cut out. So he's right that site hasn't existed in a little while now. But again, I think everybody should look at Ben's site. rbsdm.com. That was it's a pretty good site. And it's just, you use it, you click it, it works. It's really, really good in that regard. So I'd say if you're getting into that, check out that site as well. And it's widely endorsed by anybody in the space, fantasy betting, anything. Mike Zinman, you had a question about Ontario DFS. Go Jeff Zachodny on Twitter, ZOCHNDE. It's Jeff, GEOFF, based in Ontario, works with covers. His whole life is following Ontario betting, and he's brilliant at it. So go over there. I don't have the answers for DFS in Ontario. I don't know. I'm now as far in Canada as you could be away from Ontario. I can't help you there, but Jeff certainly can. Send him a direct message. He'll help you out with anything you want to know about the laws and stuff that are going on in Ontario. He's got the side to that. Bryce Miller at Bryce Miller 35. Do you suggest playing my bets based off a percentage of bankroll or fixed amount to win one unit? For example, do you think it is a good idea to bet $110 to win 100 in perpetuity, or is it better to increase and decrease your bet sizes based on percentage of current bankroll? My expertise here is on the handicapping side. Here's what I'll say from experience. The most efficient way to grow your bankroll is to use something like Kelly staking and follow that method. What I would say when I was trying to use it was you have to be very, very good at being specific about what your edge is on a specific bet. I think two things about bankroll management in general when it comes to betting. One, if you don't have a bankroll to manage, what time are you spending trying to manage it? So I think that's a legitimate question, is the size of my bankroll worth managing to begin with, or am I just doing that for fun? That's not something a lot of people will tell you. But if you only have a couple $100 and you're trying to do percentage staking and you end up betting $3.82 on a game on Sunday night that you want to watch and have fun with, you're probably going to have a pretty miserable experience. So really think about, first of all, is your bankroll worth managing? And then number two, if you're going to go and use an incremental system for staking, you really have to ask yourself is how accurate are these edges that you're projecting? Because when it comes to a lot of them, if you're like 1 or 2 percentage points off, the amount of money that you're going to be required to stake to maximize that system, even if you're going to like a half or quarter usage, is going to be substantial. And so my experience has led me to say that in most cases, for most people, especially if you're not doing this professionally, and especially if you don't have a giant bankroll that you're trying to manage effectively, if you're just doing this every day for fun on the side, you're probably much better off just flat staking, because you probably don't know how to effectively calculate what your edge is on that bet is to begin with. So that's what I would say. That's just from my experience. Paulo De Silver, what main stats used to handicap totals in the NFL? I've made models in the past, but I've had no success. So I'd figure to ask someone other than my brain. Again, not necessarily my expertise when it comes to modeling, but I'd say when you're just looking at totals in general in football, plays per game, yards per play, pace, that's going to get you to a really basic total. Beyond that, a lot more work needs to go into it to make those totals any good. So I would say that would be something that you would have to take a look at. Steve Medley explained how to use power ratings. There's ratings again, his words, not mine, to find an advantage with the point spread. This is actually a common question that a guy is going to get, and KH just posted a quick overview on how to calculate an edge. So like you're getting into a world where my expertise very much handicapping football. I know these are questions that people want answers to. Again, it's going to be kind of a bad answer and one you're not going to hear, but one I've kind of come to realize. You're going to be way better off in 9 out of 10 cases using someone else's power ratings or using a lot of different other ratings than you are going to make your own and then immediately have an edge based on what you have written down or put into a spreadsheet. I think especially when you're looking at the NFL specifically and you're saying, okay, I'm going to make power ratings and I'm going to start betting NFL sides, the chances of you just going from I don't know how to make ratings to making ratings and then using that to stake your own money that you've worked for, I think is a really, really big leap. And so in terms of anything ratings, I've changed sort of my answer from sort of here's kind of how you can get into it, to just look at other people's and draw conclusions from those. You're going to be in a much different scenario. Mr. Q, do you watch the games, or is it unnecessary as long as you have the stats? 100% watch the games. Watch all of them. Watch the condensed games if you don't have the time to do it. I think in today's 2023 betting landscape, if you're watching this stream and you have your phone up and you're betting at whatever number of apps that you have and you're doing it for fun, if there's a team you follow and you watch every single game that they play, you're going to look through those apps before the game starts. And because you've watched all of those games for that team that you love, you're going to find the bet that stands out, that you're going to have some sort of take or opinion on, that's stronger than anything that you're going to get from trying to go. If you're not someone who's into math and numbers and modeling, you're just a sports fan watching this, you're going to have a lot more success doing that by watching it and making your own conclusions on that team or region that you love to watch than you will from anything else. And so that's what I would say in regards to that. Absolutely watch the games. Obviously a lot more work and time, but you're probably watching the games anyway. So why not invest that time that you're watching into the games to actually come up with a good opinion that you can use, even if it's just for one team and you're shopping these apps to find the prop or something that makes a lot of sense overall. I don't want to foray much more into this betting side. I know these are getting very betting specific. There are 15 other people at Right Angle Sports who are far more qualified to answer these betting specific ones, especially when it's relating to a lot of things in the service. Going forward, I'm going to hopefully do these live streams again. Maybe we'll keep it to like a Sunday night thing for the openers and try to sync it up with the podcast. I'm going to keep it NFL focused. That's really where I can hopefully provide some real value and some expertise that you guys can take away with and potentially use yourself. When it comes to really the in-depth betting side, there's so many well more qualified people over at Red Angle Sports to answer those than I can. Made it to an hour and 16. That's about an hour longer than I thought that this would last. 160 people. Thank you so much for everybody who tuned in. Again, let's try to do these maybe every Sunday night for openers. We'll tie it in with the podcast for those longer episodes. Appreciate everybody stopping by. Appreciate everybody contributing with their questions. If you're, again, not going to make next week, you have questions, send me a text message. We'll get to them as much as we can. But for now, I'm off. Watch some TV with the wife, record the podcast for tomorrow morning. We're back. NFL football. The Simple Handicap will be up on Apple and Spotify tomorrow at 5 a.m. or earlier. And of course, we have the service going on at Red Angle Sports. We have 5 and 10 play options now available that are cheaper if you're looking for an entry point into NFL. raspicks.com/order. We'll probably have a couple more releases this week for NFL Week 1. Appreciate it, guys. Have a fantastic Sunday night. I'll talk to each and every one of you again tomorrow morning on the podcast.